Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Citizens of the world, our first guest today is the Honorable Andre Vasquez, Alderman of the Fighting 40th Ward here in Chicago. And he is the chairman, I believe, of the Committee on Immigrant and Refugee Rights. He's been a guest on the show a number of times, and I wanted to grill him today a little bit about what's going on with ICE and with immigrants in our city. So good day to you, Alderman.
Good morning. How's it going, Michael?
Good. Tell us a little bit about what you know about the status of ICE in our city.
Yeah, I wish I could say that there's been a change, but there really hasn't, right? The noticeable change that we saw related to ICE activity was there was a bit of a dip when we headed into the winter last year, but it wasn't like they were gone. And so what we're seeing is once it started warming up, there seemed to be a level of still number of abductions happening, of these deportations occurring. It's increased kind of gradually, I guess is the way to describe it, but it's continued on. And so there's been a number of different strategies that have been taken. So for example, earlier in the year, a street vendor who had received a ticket from the city had to go to court to answer for it, as opposed to the city's administrative hearings. So they go to court, and at that point they are taken and deported. Actually, they're in a detention center in Kentucky. So they're doing different strategies. We've seen that there's situations where they're running into cars to pulling the cars over. We just saw that happen in the 12th Ward Monday. And we've been on our end looking to follow up as to how we hold CPD accountable, as how that plays out, what the state's attorney is or isn't doing, and trying to make sure that neighbors are better prepared for what could be an increase, and definitely a concern around November when we get back to the elections.
So tell us a little bit more about what happened on Monday, the 24th, out at the Broadview ICE Processing Center. I saw it on CBS News. They were throwing people to the ground. You know anything about that incident?
That one I'm a little less familiar because it happened in Broadview. I know on Monday here in the city, we kind of had all our efforts on the 12th Ward on I-55.
So McKinley Park?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So in McKinley Park, basically an ICE, a federal agent car rammed into another car, my understanding is on the highway. And then for a number of hours, they were still there even as protesters were around. And so I think a lot of the city's focus was on our colleague, Alderwoman Julia Ramirez, who was on site at the moment, along with other folks. I'm less familiar on what's going on with Broadview, but to my understanding, nothing much has changed over there, right? They've still got folks at the detention center. We saw people protesting, and I believe there's always been a tension between the state police there and like protesters.
What's been the role of the police? I mean, are they staying out of it? Or are they aiding ICE? Are there isolated incidents where they would be on the side of ICE, apparently?
Yeah, I think it might not be a shocker to people, but we don't necessarily know. So there's a different number of things. So in Broadview, as you mentioned, the state police there were instructed by the governor to kind of, for lack of a better term, maintain order, just to also keep from the federal government coming on site. And that, I mean, one might make the argument that it was better to have that than the federal agents, right? Of course, but the state police is still operating the way some people are used to seeing police operate during protests. And in Chicago, we haven't been able to get details on what interactions have occurred, what happens in these incidents. Even if there are complaints from neighbors, there hasn't been really follow through on investigations related to incidents that are occurring. So it's kind of in the dark. And even though the mayor issued an executive order for a number of months before then, and even after, us as a Committee on Immigrant and Refugee Rights isn't getting the information on what's happening in these incidents in a way that would lead to transparency and improvements into what those interactions are, making sure there's accountability in place.
Do we have any knowledge of how many people have been taken in by ICE and are being held, et cetera, sent away? Any details on that?
I think the National Immigration Justice Center does. I know it's in the hundreds, right? Because it's kind of accumulative since once it started. We're talking a number of years. I don't have information on like more recently how those numbers have upticked, because what we hear about are kind of the bigger incidents as opposed to like the protocol, what's been happening.
One of my producers wanted me to ask you, why haven't the Chicago police and the state's attorney arrested and prosecuted mass kidnappers roaming our city streets, causing accidents, etc.?
Yeah, there's a number of ways to answer that. I'll try to tackle a couple of them. I think the first one would be the one that I think about, which is the worst case scenarios. So if you could imagine a police officer looking to arrest a federal agent and how that might play out in real time, right? You would see two law enforcement agents, weapons drawn, and that could go a number of ways that I think leads to a much larger invasion, if we're being honest, right? Then you get more federal agents coming in. Then you get the National Guard. Then it becomes something that could be exponentially more horrifying than what we currently have going on. And so I think there's probably at that level a real concern. I think there's also some level of reality that there are probably law enforcement folks who feel a kinship or an agreement in some of the thought process of the federal agents. That's a problem. But in reality, we can't even see when people file reports, the investigation's continuing. For example, in Albany Park, there was an incident where someone was taken, and in that one, a federal agent ran a car into another car, and it became an incident on the corner. And when it was filed as a report, it was marked as a traffic incident and kind of left at that and suspended, as opposed to following through on what could be and I view as a kidnapping, right? So the police haven't moved forward with any reports to actually lead the charges to take to the state's attorney. And the state's attorney's been saying, we need the reports to act on to take the next step. And so somewhere in the middle of that tension is the inability to get anything moving. And so I think 2-3 weeks ago, Commissioner Jessica Vasquez, myself, and others were outside of the police station at Belmont and Western with 9 individuals who were all filing reports related to Operation Midway Blitz and other federal action. We're staying on those to see if anything will continue to move.
Alderman Vasquez, you mentioned the state's attorney, and I'm just curious to know what your sense is about the difference between when we had Kim Foxx as our state's attorney and we now have Burke as our state's attorney. And, it's clearly it wasn't the progressive that won, and Burke has the position. Is there a real change in the way the state's attorney deals with stuff as compared to what it was like under Kim Foxx?
I think there's definitely a difference in approach. So, I've had meetings with the state's attorney, and she's articulated kind of by the letter of the law why she can't do a certain thing, right? So I think she's looking at it that way. I think this is a moment that we need to push more than what the letter of the law may be. We need to make sure that we are interpreting it in different manners to give us the tools necessary when it's clear that the federal government is attacking its own cities. I think it's crystal clear. I think there is a contrast to when State's Attorney Foxx was here. To be fair, we weren't in the same situation, right?
Right.
But in other interactions I with State's Attorney Foxx, there was a willingness to kind of figure out how to solve a problem. And I think some of it is the lens of where you're coming from. If someone's coming from a background of living through oppression, of understanding what it's like as a person of color, moving through this world, there is a different lens with which they're looking at situations and someone who hasn't had that experience. And so I think that State's Attorney Burke, or O'Neill Burke, I should say, it makes a fair case. It's not necessarily one that I agree with. And I think that there's a complication that occurs when we know there's a historic drop in crime that's happening, and that's nationwide. How certain members of the public pick and choose who they want to credit for that work. And I think there's enough of that credit to go around. We need a little more proof of what actually is getting it done.
I came across this, and I'm going to ask you, a pledge signed by nearly half of Chicago's aldermen to reject campaign contributions from companies allegedly tied to federal immigration crackdowns has split the city council. And I haven't followed this very closely. What is that all about?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So about a month ago, Fair Vote, a number of groups reached out about this ICE-style pledge. And there are a number of companies that have some level of contract or association with the federal agents, Department of Homeland Security, right? You can imagine your Motorola's, your AT&T's, your companies that have surveillance tech data, as well as other companies. And so I know I was approached to say, hey, would you sign to a pledge to not accept money from these parties based on this reason? I was like, totally makes sense to me. In fact, my only question was, are we backdating it? Are we looking at like where folks have taken in the past? Because I think prior to this incident, I'm sure that's more widespread. But if you're asking going forward, sure, no problem. After that, the number grew to about 15, and now it's at 21. And I think I've got the same question I imagine most of Chicagoans have. Why is it only 21? Why is it in a situation where we're watching what Trump and the federal government have been doing and weaponizing it against Chicagoans, disrupting our city, disrupting our economy, kidnapping neighbors, breaking into daycares, right?
Now you're talking.
Right. Why is that? Why is it a hard thing to say, I'm not accepting money with anyone associating with them? And I've also heard that a lot of the companies that are involved are concerned about how they're looking and their brand. And it's like, great, that's what they're supposed to be doing. And so the question I would ask Chicagoans is your alder sign on? And if not, why not? You should ask them, because I think that there might be a level of comfort that doesn't move some of our colleagues to go, yeah, of course I'm signing on. The other question to ask is, for city contracts in general, what are we looking at? And is there a possibility to end contracts to make sure we're not continuing contracts with any parties who similarly have that?
Does that, the way it lines up, you say 21 people have supported this recommendation. Does that align with the makeup of the city council? The number of progressives, is it smaller, larger?
It's nuanced, meaning it's not like, I don't believe it's all 19 members of the Progressive Caucus. I believe there are other members who are not in Progressive Caucus that have signed on, right? And so I think it's very much about who is attuned and whose constituency is pushing them if they're not already on board, right? And so I do think this is like more traditional campaigns where they need to hear it from people, and they need to be ashamed, ain't the word I'm looking for, but they do need to be brought to task to go, why do you believe it's okay to actually be engaged and take money from folks like this? I
want to talk a little bit more about the council, the mayoral race, et cetera, but let me ask you, what is actually the role and the responsibility of the Committee on Immigrant and Refugee Rights? And are you the chairman of that committee still?
Yeah, I'm the chair of the committee. It's morphed since we've been there, right? So before it was kind of like, hey, there were no hearings for years. Then we came in and immediately in the middle of like the migrant mission and people being bussed in, making sure that the city was held accountable to standards that we said we could do. So as a committee, we have some level of peer review and jurisdiction related to that. So we would look and say, why are we thinking about hiring Guard World? Why are we thinking about putting an encampment on toxic land? Why is the Johnson administration looking to evict people 60 days after being in a shelter, right? Those are things that the city was doing that we were holding to account. We then kind of further engaged in know your rights trainings all across the city of Chicago, talking about what was happening nationally. We still do, having webinars to teach people what happens if their families are being abducted, where to find lawyers. So we became less of a committee and more of a de facto department or office of where we're on the ground also doing this work while informing people. And so it's been a whole roller coaster to do that, to be involved in intergovernmental kind of conversations with different levels of government. So it's been a little bit all the above. And it continues to change. We're going to continue doing meetings to educate people.
We've, we had a lot of immigrants arrive here in Chicago. They were being sent by Governor Abbott as well as coming on their own. How many people are now still housed by the city? Or what's the status of all these folks who came? How are they being treated? What can you tell us about that community?
The last number when we were kind of keeping track was somewhere around 60,000, like north of that, I think. But as you would imagine, and this is something that we kind of stick to with our own protocol, we don't want to track it. We don't want to have the data on individuals, and we don't want to have anything that would be traced back. So in some regard, we leave it to the organizations to do that work. And so, for example, as many people here in Chicago know, there's a lot of neighbors also doing school patrols and rapid response and all these things. We don't interact in a way that has their information either, because we are concerned that the federal government could seek our records on anything. So we try our best to kind of like keep a distance while finding ways to partner in the best way possible. And that's all I'm saying about that.
Good. I'm glad you are listening or viewing live from the Heartland. We are talking with Andre Vasquez, the alderman of the 40th Ward. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk a little bit about the city council. There's a number of progressives. It's certainly a different city council than we had years ago. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think we're watching what I believe is the evolution of the independence of a city council. And, our office has had a part to play. So we looked at budgets and said, we can't have the rubber stamp anymore. And trying to do a budget process in 1 month doesn't allow people to see more. So a couple of years ago, we changed the budget process to have a mid-year budget hearing and build off of that. 1 year after that, the city council figured out how to create its own budget in spite of a mayor. And so that right now in this moment is polarizing. It's creating large challenges. But I believe in the long run of things, in a world where you have a more moderate mayor, for example, having a city council empowered to do these things is actually an overall good. It leads to more transparency and outcomes. And we're continuing to work. Like right now, we want an independent budget office. Now, because Chicago is still a political town with its political history, there are colleagues, and I'll say the Johnson administration as well, who seek to take advantage of the current situation and kind of polarize people and say, no, we're the good guys, you're the bad guys. No, we're the good guys, you're the bad guys. And it gets to the point where now you got people in their corners rather than engaging to solve problems. And I think in the middle of that, you see a number of us, whether they're your more run-of-the-mill moderates or your independent progressives like myself. You got Matt Martin, Maria Haddon, Daniel Espada, Desmond Yancey, who we want to get the work done. And so it's more like show us the homework. We'll talk to everyone and figure out how to find agreement. But it's challenging when you got your conservatives, right, who are looking to just cut and be just against a mayor, and a mayor who's looking to say through social media influencers that it's not about the mayor, it's about the alders. And we have our own Mamdani here. When you watch New York, you can tell the difference.
Well, let's real briefly, you got any take on the mayoral election coming up in May along with the aldermanics? There's a lot of ads from Willie White and a bunch of other people already clearly running.
Yeah. I don't trust any.
You're not running, right?
No. We're doing 4 more years in council. The way I hear it, you need a couple of dollars to run for that one. It's a little bit much. I don't have confidence in any of them, including the current one. And so where I look at, and I talk to the neighbors about this because they're always asking me, it's thinking about Chicagoans. We tend to vote for who could beat whom, not who is best to manage the situation. And because we have that kind of fighting spirit, and I think the runoff elections cause that, we don't necessarily think about who can manage this situation. It's why we're supporting ranked choice voting and looking to make sure we can kind of move in that direction. That being said, I think looking at the debates as they move forward and figure out what do people commit to doing? What are they publicly saying about solving these problems? Those answers are important because anyone running for office, moderate or whatnot, is saying, well, we need to grow. We need to grow the economy. That's not a plan. That's a goal. Walk me through what you're going to do that. as opposed to just saying what you think you don't like about the current one. And on the Johnson side of things, it's been a lot of lip service and executive orders now. Like, walk us through what it looks like to engage out here, because I've seen 3 years of that not being the case with Mayor Johnson. And now that we're in an election year, now it's like, hey, let's bring the band back together. And that's not the best result for Chicagoans either. So I don't think this will be easy. And I think it's why it's important for every neighbor to look at who their alderperson is and hold them accountable to what they want to see in government as well.
And you are going to run for re-election.
Yeah, I'm currently knocking on the doors, talking to the neighbors. That's right.
Yeah, I got this quote from you. Real leadership begins with a commitment to engage, educate, and empower people and stakeholders in our community. That belief is at the core of the work we do in the 40th Ward. That's true, right?
We're employees. You guys are our bosses. The public pays the taxes, it pays our salary. And we always start our meetings by reminding people that, like, this government is yours. You own it. So it is our duty to help you learn about it, to be as transparent as possible, so you can make sure you know what your employees are doing and hold us accountable. Yeah.
Well, Andre, it's really good talking to you. I had a number of other questions. I did want to talk about your hip hop career, which I did not know about. Back in the 90s and the early part of this century, you were involved with the Mole Men and a number of other groups, and we'll talk about that another time.
Well, I just love that you said the early part of this century. I got arthritis. My back hurt when I heard it. We're going to be performing at Eddie Fest, the Chicago Federation of Labor, Labor Day event on September 5th. Myself and Ron Fest is a school board member. And so, I'm always happy to have the conversation. I'm just glad that we get to represent our city, and the opportunity to move us forward is there. We just all have to do it together, neighbors and the electeds involved.
So where is this event? September 5th. It's put on by who and what?
Yeah, if you Google Chicago Federation of Labor, Labor Day Eddie Fest, right? It'll state it, because it's in the 10th Ward. And there's a whole day of events. There's a parade and performances. And they've asked myself and Ryan Fest to perform. So we're probably going to be like a hip hop cover band is really what we're going to do out there. So it'll be good to kind of get our exercise in.
Well, it's great talking to you. Thanks for getting me up this early. Well, I get up early, but actually don't usually do the show this early. Everybody else.